Hi, class. I'm Dr. Brenda G. Juarez Harris, and I will be the instructor this semester for spring 2023 at Southern Utah University. And I will be teaching 3 sections this semester. I'm super excited about that. Our course is EDUC 6915, and it's officially entitled Master Teachers in 21st Century Learning Spaces. I hope you'll excuse me if I am a little uncomfortable with the term master. I know sometimes people think that I want to be a word police or something like that, but it really has nothing to do with that. It's just that I'm often thinking about historical relationships, and I just, for myself, I like to use the word exemplary better for this course. Exemplary teachers in the 21st century learning spaces. And I like the term learning spaces in the sense that official classrooms, K-12, are not the only places that people learn, including children. And in the 21st century with technology and having, just spent 2 years plus in a global health crisis, we've learned a lot about how some of our institutions from the 20th and 19th century that were established in societies around the world, including our own in U.S. society with schooling. These kind of brick and mortar things are starting to be a little bit more porous, and learning spaces are much more expansive now. And so that's pretty exciting. So master teachers in 21st century learning spaces. I hope you don't mind. You'll excuse me if I refer to it regularly as exemplary teachers in 21st century learning spaces. For myself, just a little FYI about you and me. And I do not ever try to be offensive, because I'm trying to foster productive interactions and learning climates. And not just in teaching and learning situations, but in any kind of interpersonal. And so sometimes people don't realize that I have spent the majority of my adult life in the Deep South. And when I say Deep South, I mean Deep South. I ran into someone that I was interacting with in San Juan County the other day. We were on a Zoom meeting, and I said I was from the Deep South, and she was curious about that. She was a little bit skeptical maybe about that. And when I told her I was from Lower Alabama, from Mobile, Alabama, she said, "Oh, okay, yeah, that is the Deep South." So she herself was from the middle of Louisiana. I think she said Lafayette, somewhere around there. So definitely Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia were considered the Deep South. And so sometimes people from other areas, even actually, you may not know this, but Delaware is actually officially considered a state that is in the South. So, but popular consciousness and thinking about it, you would never think about Delaware as the South. You would think about it probably as in New England. I know I would. But having done a lot of research on the geographical South, I just know that it is technically considered that. And so the reason I bring that up is because, having been in the Deep South for a long time and socialized there, I have acquired this habit of referring to individuals that I respect deeply and care about as sir or ma'am. So you may hear me say that. I may say that to you. I may say, yes, ma'am. No, sir. I may say something like that. I may also call you maybe Miss Cindy, Miss Smith, Mr. Jeremy, Mr. Ogden. I may do that. And it is for me a sign of how much I value and respect you. And I know in other parts of the country, sometimes particularly women will feel like they're being stereotyped as quote old, although being a grandmother now for 3 years, I have kind of had to rethink what society teaches us about what is so-called old. And even if you accept those, like, what does that mean? I find great value in the collective wisdom of living over generations. And I certainly have found this unexpected boon in having a little 3.5-year-old boy that is the son of my youngest son. And then we have a 18-month-old who is the daughter of my stepson. And those two little ones are just, they have my partner and I just wrapped around their finger. So we spend a lot of time in our lives as adults being so-called old. And that's something interesting to think about. So I do not intend at any time to be offensive to you by calling you ma'am or sir, or if you prefer other genders and you want to be outside of the binary of male, female, I am absolutely committed to respecting your person and will use the preferred name and pronoun that you request. And I hope you will give me a little bit of space too, knowing that where I'm coming from, it is actually the height of disrespect not to use someone's title. I myself do not mind being called Brenda. You are welcome to call me Brenda. My mom gave me that name. I would ask you, however, if you are going to use my first name, that you please think about, be sure that you thought through, do you call your other professors who are men by their first names as well? Historically, there's been a hierarchy where women might be Brenda or Sue or Cindy, and then the men would be Dr. Hines, Dr. Brown, whatever it is. They'll be the title, but the women will be their first name. So as long as that kind of gender hierarchy isn't, the issue, and I know that people generally don't do it consciously, but we're socialized into that. So that's just a little FYI about myself. Please don't be offended if I do call you ma'am or sir or Ms. or Mr. And if you have other pronouns that you would prefer that are outside of the binary, let me know. I'm happy to do that for you. So that's just a little bit of info as we get past the title in our course. And I am actually a classroom teacher myself. Being a classroom teacher was my dream as a child. I know a lot of little girls do dream of that, and many times they go on and do other things. But I was a little girl that was the oldest of 7 children and loved to play teacher and would make the neighbor children and my younger siblings play school with me. And I thought it was just about being bossy. And in fact, my siblings did call me Bossy Brenda, because I was always thinking that I was practicing my role as a teacher, thinking that you had to be a boss. So I've learned a lot more about that and have enjoyed teaching not only in public school as an elementary teacher, and collaborating with middle and secondary teachers, but I've also done a lot of work in community spaces like in Alabama. I worked with various church groups, and we set up after school tutoring programs and kind of like Sunday school-esque sort of things that were academic and religious, and didn't weren't necessarily of a certain denomination. We Saturday schools, we did that. So a lot of that's coming out of the lower Alabama in the deep South. So you have a lot of issues of race and class and gender at play there. The South is the poorest region of the United States, and as you probably already know, economics is a strong, strong, strong predictor of how well students will do in K-12 schooling. Their parents' economic status will be the biggest predictor of how they will fare in school, not how smart they are, not how hard they work, but their parents' socioeconomic status. So to work in an area where the region is the poorest in the United States, that had many wonderful opportunities and many challenges. But as you know, every area has its own issues and challenges. And so as a fellow classroom teacher who went on and wanted to know more about how to be an exemplary teacher, I ended up completing a doctorate at the University of Utah. So I do have deep ties to Utah. In fact, on my mother's side of my family, my mother's mother, that line of the family, they came into the valley with Brigham Young. My family was part of the people who were very about establishing the dominant religion in Utah. That particular line was. And as we think about it from the indigenous perspective in Utah with our 8 tribes and indigenous nations, my family was part of squatting on land in what became Utah County, which was actually part of the Utahs, the various bands and groups, and it became Utah County, a singular instead of plural, when my mother's family was part of that. So I do have deep ties and deep love for Utah, and an awareness of the richness and the tensions and challenges that are in Utah, and also have lived various places after having finished graduate school. So I did a second master's degree at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and I have also taught in the social justice education program at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. So I do have a range of experiences in all areas, and I'm super excited to be kind of a dual resident. I have a home in Lower Alabama yet, and we are presently also spending part of the year in Southern Utah in Cedar City, and just adoring the most gorgeous, fantastic outdoor landscape that I've ever had the privilege of being around. And I have been in South America, I have been in Mexico. So I've seen a lot of beautiful places, and I just love Southern Utah, and I can see why my great 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 grandfather, Benjamin F. Johnson, wanted to actually stay down in this area of Utah. His family refused, and he went back up to Utah County, but I can see why he thought it was stunning down here. I do too. So I had never been down to Southern Utah before. I had driven through it. I had traveled to Las Vegas and to Los Angeles and traveled from Salt Lake City. But most of my time in graduate school, I spent in Utah and Salt Lake counties. So I was unaware of how stunning and how many beautiful people and places are in Southern Utah. So I'm enjoying that now and bring all that experience with me to teaching in at Southern Utah University. This is a great honor and a great joy to me. And as I mentioned, I am a school teacher myself. And so I identify very much with the challenges and opportunities that K-12 teachers face, particularly as we're still lingering with the issues of a global pandemic and trying to rethink things. So our course is called Exemplary Teachers in the 21st Century. I thought I would just give you a little overview of it. And then we do have 2 Zooms scheduled for this term. I have I think 2 sections first term and then 1 section second term. So they are 7 weeks and they go super fast. So these are big topics that are accelerated in 7 weeks. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and look at some of the different parts of our Canvas page that I have put together for you. Let me see if I can get that on for you. Okay. And I am this little guy right here. This is my little man that he was part of our community education group in Lower Alabama, and we were putting on a Black History Month presentation for the community, and his grandmother, his great grandmother, which she wasn't, you might think great grandmother, she must have been old, but she wasn't. She isn't. She was part of desegregating institutions in Lower Alabama. So this little guy, he means a lot to me. So I put him on the cover of our course. Okay, so if I go over to the syllabus on our website page, on our Canvas page, it gives you some of the information. Like some of you may be close to Cedar City or in Cedar City. I do have an on-campus office, which is in room 312 in the education building. You can reach me on my cell phone. I prefer to be reached via Canvas over here in Canvas email, not my university email, although I do look at that periodically, but I'm on Canvas a lot. So if you email me on Canvas, I'll probably see that faster. I'm not always super fast at getting back to phone calls. My children complain about that all the time. So the best way to get a hold of me is actually my Canvas email. Okay, but I will, I feel like communication is all about trying to foster positive outcomes. And so I will work very hard to make sure that I reply to you and get back to you as soon as possible, but certainly within 2 days during the week. And on the weekends, sometimes I like to go to the mountains. I like to travel. I like to do things. So I may not be at the computer during the weekend. Okay. So just a little overview of our course. There's a need for educators to equip students with holistic education that emphasizes life skills like communication, cross-cultural competition, collaboration, and critical thinking. If you think about that 21st century part of our course title, that it says 21st century for a reason. The skills that you need in the 21st century as compared to the 20th century are different. Knowledge is changing exponentially fast, and so where before it used to be like you learned your 3 R's and you got them in your head and you were good to go. Well, in the 21st century, we live in this era of rapidly changing knowledge bases. And so your most important thing is not just like these pre-existing bodies of knowledge, but your best thing is learning how to learn, because what you have to know a lot of times, if you're in school right now, it won't even exist yet. And so it's changing that quickly. So the 21st century is super important, and we need teachers who are able to foster that kind of learning, rather than if you look back to where we came from in the 20th century, in the 19th century, and even in the 18th century, as we were thinking about what becoming an educated citizen meant, we were going through industrialization and batch processing and factories and conveyor belts. That was kind of the thinking of the day, efficiency. And so our public schools, the common schooling movement, was highly influenced by that. And so, but we are in a post-industrial era now. And so the boundaries of these brick and mortar buildings and nation states and this, those are very porous anymore. And so the old ways of thinking about it are not going to work as well. So our course materials, this was hard, knowing that we had 7 weeks. I wanted to not waste your money. So I chose a book that I really like. It's called it's Equity Centered Trauma Informed Education. I know that's kind of a mouthful, but I really, really like it. It has precise definitions of equity. It has precise definitions of trauma, and it just lends itself very well to what 21st century thinking and skills and disposition and knowledge are kind of. It's not those old kind of industrial era sort of concrete things. It's like a way of being in the world. And so I chose that one. That's our one of ours that we'll use. And then we're also going to use Dr. Socorro Herrera's biography-driven, culturally responsive teaching. This one's kind of more of a how-to strategies, where this one's a little bit more theoretical, not totally. I think they both have, they link their theory and practice as well, but maybe this one's a little bit more, like step 1, step 2. So I do know Socorro Herrera. She was my instructor when I was working on my English as a second language endorsement. And so she taught several of the courses that I took for that. So I finished 2 master's degrees, English as a second language endorsement, and then also my PhD. So part of my English as a second language endorsement, Dr. Herrera was the one who was part of that. And then you hear a lot about differentiated learning. What does that mean? And so that this is just kind of a cheat sheet that I think is very useful, because you have to kind of know how the brain thinks to be able to link all of these things together, the individual student, the content you're trying to help them to learn, and then how is that embedded within larger society, because teachers can be very dangerous, and sometimes classroom teachers get a chuckle out of that when I say teachers can be dangerous. But what I mean by that, and you will learn that as you read the story of the butterflies girl in one of our modules, the little girl in the story, her teacher is presenting her truth, and the child's experience is very different, and they're colliding on it. And because the teacher is in a position of authority and power, then the teacher's position is the truth. And imposing that on the child, you can very much do a lot of damage to children. So when we talk about trauma, and we are often thinking about trauma that students, the learners, encounter at home, but actually for many children, school, their classrooms is where they encounter trauma, even when their teachers don't intend it to be so. So that's super important. Okay, so there are some recommended texts. I put those there just because they're great. If you're anything like me, I am a voracious reader. My husband will say, we have to have money for food too, because I will spend money on books. I could have chosen We Got This by Cornelius Minor. This is a wonderful, wonderful book too. I could have chosen that, but I didn't. So I should have probably put that on recommended too. This is another one. We're going to read some chapters out of this one. This one is Dr. Zaretta Hammond's book, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. Okay, so that's a very, very, very helpful one too. Another one, some of the stories that you're going to read, like The Butterflies Girl and the story by Frank Finnegan, who is actually a classroom teacher, is Beyond Heroes and Holiday. I took that out of here. And this book here, I like this one a lot. This is actually right there on the recommended text, and it's called Different Schools for a Different World. And it's short and sweet. I know teachers are busy. I like that one too. But I didn't think it brought out equity enough. Sometimes we look at things and we're like, well, like the term community, it tends to be associated with really good things. Like we're like, oh, we have to build community. But sometimes there's a downside to that too. It can be very inhibiting for some people. Like the word teamwork, take a hit for the team. It can be very constraining for certain people for various reasons. Like, how come I always have to be the one that takes a hit for the team? And so there's a lot of dynamics that go into that are about unequal relations of power. And so I felt like I love this book. I really do. And I do recommend it, but I chose the ones that I did because I felt like they did a better job looking at equity. And that's basically, school teacher is dangerous because school teacher is the one that very much kind of opens the door or ensures that they have another barrier, and the school to prison pipeline is fully functioning. Teachers reproduce that. That's where the rubber hits the road. I could have chosen this one, Becoming a Globally Competent Teacher, as well. I do like that one. Culturally Relevant Teaching and Learning for Schools. So there were quite a few options, but I was like, okay, if I can I have to limit choices, and I don't want to waste your money, and so we only have 7 weeks. So I made the choices that I did. You can let me know what you think as we move along. If you find something that you find would have been more helpful or whatever. I'm always looking to improve to see what would be best for you. I also love Goldie Mohammed's work. You can tell I spend a lot of time with, I'm trying to get up where it's focused for you. It's called Cultivating Genius. Love it. Even though she's a literacy teacher, I feel like her principles really work for any teacher, even if you were a PE teacher. So that's kind of about the text. You can go through these learning objectives and so on. Discussion boards, let me please pause here for a minute to I think this is easier to speak it out rather than type it out. Look at the rubric. Some of you may have had me as an instructor before, and so you might already know this. But I use the department's rubric and I like it. I feel like they did a good job with it because we're an online asynchronous course. We don't get to look into each other's eyes and see them twinkle or see them confused or watch your body language. And so because of that, and because we're so busy in our classrooms and in our private lives and our other responsibilities, the discussion board is really, really important. That's where we come together to learn from and with each other. I am really a hardliner on this. I feel like learning is a social endeavor, and we learn best. Human beings are social creatures. We won't even survive for long periods of time without other human beings. So, of course, learning, we're rigged for learning as human beings. When teachers say some things, and I hear this from teachers periodically, they'll say things like the kids just don't know anything. No, that is not possible. That is humanly not possible, because children and human beings at all stages are rigged for learning. We start learning even before we are born. We know our mother's voice, we hear music, we pick up all kinds of things in various ways from the get-go, and we have that with us through the rest of our stages of life. And so we're built for learning, but we need each other. We do better when we learn with and from each other. So the rubric will say it has various criteria, but what I'm looking for is for your post to be like pretty early in the week. And then and it tells you, read the rubric, you'll see. And so the main idea is that you post early. The questions are going to be up there by Tuesday. And so whoever the discussion board leaders are, and they tend to be great questions. In doing my research, I know that it's actually hard to craft good questions, but the courses I've seen so far, they do a great job with it. And I know that this class will as well. Take it very seriously. We're professional educators, and I'm not worried about that. So they'll be up there. But where we run into trouble is people will say, well, I didn't get to it. Okay, well, what you have to do is what I did. I was in graduate school with 6 kids in K-12, and I was very busy. I worked too, and I'm still busy. Even though I'm an empty nester, I'm still super busy, but I just have learned to like put I do things like I must get this done today. I cannot close the day without this. And so my time has been filled up differently, even though it's not with children at home anymore. I just have other things. So yours may be a combination of all kinds of things too, but I would put money on it that you are super busy. And so teachers need a different word, a word that is like a busy max or something like that, because we take it to a whole new level as teachers. So with this discussion board, the getting back to it and posting it is sometimes gets kicked out of the way, like I'm too busy. And you will be docked for that. So because we need you, and in a conversation, we cannot have a good conversation if you are writing something that is just like really superficial. You're like, I don't know, I'll write something just so I have some words on there. And or you're just like, yeah, I'm not going to even worry about it. I read it, I know it, I don't need to engage with my peers. No, 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 no. That's not how the brain works. First of all, in education, especially in education, we are professionals who know about teaching and learning. And so we have to pay attention to the brain. We have to, because we're the teaching and learning people. So if you are able to post early in the week, maybe you didn't get through all of the content yet, but that's okay. If you get through enough of it that you can have some sort of a meaningful post right early after the questions are posted. So maybe within 48 hours of when the questions are posted, and you've gotten a good chunk of the way, even maybe not the whole way through all of the materials for the week, great. That's what you're shooting for. And then you come back to the discussion board as you've been working farther and farther into the content of the materials for that module. So do you see how you're doing that? Is you're pacing yourself. So your brain is not geared to be crammed in. You don't get things into long-term memory if you're cramming stuff. So if you're pacing it and you're going back to it like a cyclical curriculum, then that means that you're giving time for your brain to process. So your brain's kind of like a coffee pot in the sense that it'll be percolating. You do some intense work on your homework and you're like reading. And so let's say that you're like, I gotta get working on my coursework. Um, so I'm gonna take 30 minutes and I'm gonna really focus, no distractions. I'm not going to check my phone if I hear any notifications. In fact, I'm going to turn my notifications off, because the minute I hear that, my brain goes that way. And in a couple of seconds that my energy and my focus went that way, it takes me a few seconds to get it back. So I lost time and I lost energy and I lost focus by just that simple thing, because now I got to redirect back here. So people often think, well, I'm great at multitasking. No, you are not. Human beings are not geared for that. Something's going to take the backstage and something's going to take the front stage. So when you're switching back and forth all the time, you're draining your focus, you're draining your energy, you're draining your emotion, and you're draining your ability to get it into your long-term thinking. So it's much more efficient to work very deeply and intensely for shorter periods of time and then go off and do something else. And it's very fruitful to do something very different. Like I will work hard and furious on something at my computer, and then I go do the dishes or I go do some laundry, and then I come back because I rested my brain. I did something very different. And I do take breaks. Like I mentioned, sometimes on the weekend, I'm not at the computer. Well, my brain is percolating about things I've been thinking about, even though I might be hiking up on Fiddler's Canyon. So I try not to be thinking of it consciously all the time, but sometimes these very strange and weird contrasts will hit, and I'll just have like this aha moment. Like it's like I'm thinking about photography. Well, you won't necessarily think, well, how does photography link to teaching and learning and how the brain works? But sometimes something, you never know what will spark it, and you just rested your brain on that. You got some insights on it. So the discussion board is very much built on this idea of how the brain works, that you work with short and intense periods of deep work, deep focus, and then come back to it. By the time you come back to it to respond to a peer, you've done more thinking, you've done more percolating, you've done more reading, you've done more writing, because writing is a form of thinking and analysis. And so then you come back and you do maybe a 24 to 48 hours later, and you again come back. More people have put something on the discussion board. So do you see how you're getting all this richness? And especially coming from a learning community like ours, where you have all these educators, you're going to get so much more for your money, your tuition dollars, by having all of the people on the discussion board. Because think how much experience that is, rather than if you just have just me. My experiences are rich for sure, but I'm one person. So in our learning community, you have all those other educators as well. So I'm very adamant about the discussion boards. I do mark those down if people seem to be just putting any kind of superficial thing, or you maybe posted on the last day. Well, our conversation is over. We're like turning our attention as a class to the next module. And so if you post on the last day, it's highly unlikely that anyone's going to read it. And therefore, the rest of us missed out on the opportunity to learn from and with you. So you jumped through the hoop, but you didn't actually participate in that robust learning opportunity for us. So I do mark those down very hard. If it's all on the last day or all right before the module closes, I knock a lot of points off. And a lot of the course is built on the discussion board. So that's a real priority for me, because I feel like it is very much as educators, we have to understand how teaching and learning happens. And if we don't do it for ourselves, then how are we going to facilitate it for our students? So I'm picky on that. Okay. The Zoom meetings, I am not as picky, because I don't get to see you face to face. I get to see you virtually, so I do get to see some of your faces, that's for sure. But still, I try to make it for you, about you, where it's kind of a Q&A. You have your own personal professor on speed dial, and my undivided attention is yours for that Zoom period of 60 minutes. And so I don't plan anything for you, like I want to present to you. Those are in the modules. For the Zooms, I am yours. I am at your service. I am there to ask you questions. And sometimes, because there's so many of you and only one of me, it does end up being that only one or two people get to ask a question, but that's not the end of the world, because people do ask questions that others are wondering about as well, or hadn't thought about. And then if you come prepared, and I ask that you do come prepared to put some questions in the chat. Sometimes then, if there's a lot of them that kind of speak to something that seems to not be clear in our class, or maybe something that was very affirming across the learning community, then I will bring that out in another format, and kind of either send a newsletter to you, or make a video for you, or whatever it is. But your questions are very important to me, and the Zooms are a way for you to it's your personal professor at your service undivided attention for a full hour. So it's like you take use of that, and you're the one who determines kind of which way those conversations go. They've been very rich in other courses that I've taught. I've had just amazing scholars in my classes, so they think about and comment on and ask questions about very important things. So that's kind of that. And then we will be working on a big finale project for our course. And I don't like papers or final projects to be rushed at the end. And because, again, back to how the brain works best in stages. At crash course things where you're like spending a whole night binge doing something, it doesn't usually come out super good quality. So, but if you go in stages, I call it a paper. If you have another format like maybe video or something that a Padlet, something like that, that you are interested in a different format, I am not opposed to that. Just run it by me first, okay? So that I can kind of see if you're going where I'm going. But I am so open to other things apart from paper pencil sort of or paper computer sorts of things. Some of the best assignments I've seen from undergraduates have been where I've been very broad about what their format could be, and their creativity goes crazy and they produce beautiful things. So I certainly don't want to limit your creativity either. What I'm going to be looking for in this final project is stages of how you're developing it based on what we're learning about in our course. So so we can talk more about that. But basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be focusing on the historical opportunity gap in U.S. public schools. And then remember, our course is called Exemplary Teachers in the 21st Century Learning Spaces. So do you see how we have kind of these two parts of this? Schooling in the United States has never ever worked well for all learners, and certain communities of learners have historically not been served well, and nor were they intended to be served well. You know, former President Thomas Jefferson, his baby, his beautiful project of his heart was the University of Virginia. And but his own daughters and granddaughters, who were very well educated by personal tutors at home and in France, they were not allowed to go to the University of Virginia. So schooling was actually not intended for very many of us, and we're kind of the interlopers who've like busted into schooling. And so historically, you've got this opportunity gap, and it's still there in 2023. It is still there. How do I know that? Because I look at the stats. Who's going to college? The prisons, the U.S. Penal system, the incarceration mechanism in the United States is Black and brown. The U.S. higher education is predominantly white. Of course, you have other groups and representation from other groups as well, but overwhelmingly, prisons and higher education are the inverse of each other. Higher education is predominantly white, and where the incarceration system in the United States is overwhelmingly not white. So you might say to me, but Dr. Harris, you only get incarcerated if you did something wrong. Really? Have you ever heard of something like driving while black? We have a lot of empirical evidence that suggests that even in with regular traffic stops, the if you are a minoritized driver, you are much more likely to be stopped than you are if you are white. And we know for a fact, we've have generations of documentation of empirical data that, for example, teachers will often call on boys more than they do on girls, to call on girls in the classroom. So if you're intentional about kind of evening out those inequities, then you can be part of pushing back against it. So we know graduation rates, push out rates, there's all kinds of evidence that schools, K-12 schools, are not working well. Even here in Utah, they are not working as well as they should be, could be, and really they never have. So schools came about with this public schooling movement. Was public schools were about the public. You were supposed to have this idea that it didn't matter what your socioeconomic background was. We take you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, all of this. And school should be the equalizing opportunity so that everybody has a fair shot. But schools have actually ended up historically reproducing the existing inequities. So I know I didn't become a school teacher. I didn't go, well, I want to be a school teacher because I want to help make socioeconomic status the main predictor of how well kids are going to go in school. No, I wanted to help every child. I wanted to promote every learner's opportunity to grow and learn and be excited about how joyful and beautiful and dangerous it can be to learn. Because if you learn and you can grasp knowledge and use it on your world, things are going to change, right? And we want them to change in ways that are more humanizing for all of us. And there's a lot of untapped potential and creativity that is left at the doorstep because many children do not feel that schools are wonderful, warm, exciting places to be where they belong. And hence they skip school and they do all kinds of things. So if we are going to be these exemplary teachers, there's no way that we can ignore that schools historically and to date are not working well for all children. So to be an exemplary teacher in the 21st century, you have to be able to address that historical gap. So if you teach in business as usual, that means for a fact that you are contributing to the opportunity gap. There's just no way around it. Think about it. If schools have historically been creating an opportunity gap and contributing to what opportunity gap is already outside in society, and you are doing the same thing that's been done, well, obviously you're part of the problem, right? You're part of creating and maintaining the new generation of the opportunity gap. So if you're interested in being an exemplary teacher for the 21st century learning spaces, that means that you have to know what is the opportunity gap. How are you going to work around it, against it, and promote all that schools have historically dreamed of being, those equalizing opportunities, those spaces where people develop their full potential. They learn the joys of literacy, the joys and creativity of math and science. All that is possible. Schools and school teachers make it happen. But historically, it hasn't been for all learners. So if you really believe that it's for all learners, then you have to address that opportunity gap. And there's much research on that, about the opportunity gap, that's what exemplary teachers do. So in our first couple modules, we're going to get started on we've got campus resources, we've got course resources, and then this is going to be really important to you here. All these frameworks for different approaches to humanizing pedagogy and ameliorating the historical opportunity gap. How do you become an exemplary teacher for the 21st century? Okay, so think about it as like many of you are probably very aware of the Judeo-Christian traditions. And part of the Judeo-Christian tradition that is very mainstream in the United States is the King James Bible. That's like part of that narrative. So if you're familiar with that, then you might know that there's an Old Testament and a New Testament. And in the Old Testament, there's a lot of like step-by-step kind of, on Sundays, you may only take this many steps. And if the ox is in the mire, then you can pull them out, but it has to be done before sundown. You know, there's kind of step-by-step kind of things. And then there's, in the New Testament, there's a different approach replaces the Old Testament approach, and it's based on principles. Okay, and like these ideals. And so instead of like, you may only take this many steps, there's like an ideal standard set up for you. And then people are supposed to monitor their behavior and measure it. How am I reaching up to this standard? So they're no longer counting their steps, but they're measuring their own behavior to measure up to that ideal. Well, that's important for us to understand, because these frameworks work the same way as these ideals and principles. The frameworks are like the big picture, and then they'll have particular ideals that if you look at the big picture and the ideals that make up that big picture, then that says, this is what you need to be measuring yourself against. Are you hitting these ideals to become an exemplary teacher? And so there's different approaches to it. In Utah, we have the Utah Effective Teaching Standards for 2022. And that's where our state in Utah has said, now these are the principles. This is what you got to hit. Okay. And as educators in Utah, if you're in Utah, you have to know what those are and understand those and be able to say, yes, I'm hitting those. Well, we also have other frameworks that have looked at it a little differently, and they're maybe repackaging their ideals a little differently, like the 21st Century Framework Brief. Okay, so how is that the same or different from the Utah Effective Standards? Those ideals. And then the 8 Principles of Enduring Learning Brief. Okay, so in that one, that's a little different from these two, but it's still aiming at, what does an exemplary teacher look like, sound like, act like? Am I hitting, here's all these principles, am I hitting each one? So the whole brief is the big picture, and then there's those 8 strands in there. The anti-racist framework is a different big picture, but trying a different route to get to you to that exemplary teacher for the 21st century. The equity lens framework for the Utah system of higher education. They packaged it a little bit differently as well. The family school partnership framework. This one, they're building in not just teacher and students, but they got other variables in that big picture where the family and community are part of those principles as well. This one, Ready for Rigor. This is Dr. Zaretta Hammond's framework here as well. And so she packages it differently as well. And she's very intentional about the brain and about culture. So it's very interesting to compare and contrast these. Dr. Gorski's, where he's saying, well, we have his big picture. He puts equity right there at the front and center. And then how do you, so that everything that you do in your classroom is oriented towards that equity is the outcome of your teaching and learning. So you're hitting all those standardized testing things, but it's geared towards equity. And the universal design learning principles is another framework. So our course in our 7 weeks, we're going to be going through these and comparing and contrasting these, and then you're going to be using those for your final project. You're going to be you'll know what each of those are, and then it's kind of like if you've ever done like a research project or a dissertation or a thesis, your theoretical framework is like the glasses that you put on to look at and make sense of your data and what you're looking at. So if you put on a psychology theoretical framework, it's going to tell you to bring forward and look at certain things as compared to another one. Maybe a sociological lens theoretical framework is going to tell you a different framework. Do you see what I'm saying? So you're going, these each are these big pictures, and they tell you like what are those ideals you got to be hitting. And so you'll be able to, as you get familiar with them, you'll be able to say, well, this one is kind of, I've been reading about exemplary teaching and what the 21st century characteristics and dispositions and knowledge are. And I think that maybe this one here and this one are the ones that really hit it for me. So my final project is going to be I'm going to use those two. Or maybe you're not really seeing, like, I know for my dissertation, I read all kinds of theoretical frameworks, and my dissertation committee started laughing because they said you cannot possibly use all of those. So I didn't find like any that totally answered everything for me. So I cobbled together pieces of different ones and kind of created my own. I had to justify and explain and give examples of what I meant by how I was cobbling different pieces together. But I did that. So, maybe you will too. I don't know. Or maybe you're going to find one that you're like, no, this one really works for me. Those principles, that's what I feel it's totally hitting for exemplary teachers in the 21st century. So, so that's kind of the end goal of where you're looking for, because you're going to have to be putting together as part of your final project your framework that you're using or creating, and then that's going to guide your plan for how you are going to assess your own classroom for exemplary teaching. And then what is your path forward, your plan for where you're going to make adjustments so that you're more in line with your principles for exemplary teaching. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm still always like, okay, the mark's here. Where am I? Sometimes I'm a little further away from it. Sometimes I'm a little closer. but I've never fully arrived, and you're probably the same way. So, so that's kind of how I hope that this course is going to be more than just a hoop that you jump through. And as we get going, I'm super excited to get to know you a little bit more and be able to be at your service and kind of craft this in a way that will be meaningful and helpful to you. Okay, so I don't have videos at the beginning of each module right now because I'm kind of waiting to see, what are your questions? What are your concerns? Is there any way that I can tailor it a little more for you? But I kind of have to know more about who you are and what you're looking for and kind of what backgrounds you bring to be able to know how to tailor it better to be more responsive to you. Okay? Well, it's an honor to be on this learning journey with you, and I'm looking forward to it. So let's go, fired up, ready to go. Okay? All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.